Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for today's webinar. My name is Sarah Curran. I am Director of the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, and I am thrilled to have so many people here today. This is a presentation intended for communities that are enrolled in the Community Resilience Partnership, and it's great to see so many of your faces on the screen today. Thank you. And we also recognize what an important topic this is, and so we're excited to see folks here representing organizations that support community resilience efforts, and others who are just interested in what the state and communities are doing to be better prepared for these more dangerous storms that we're seeing. So welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us today. The storms and floods that we all experienced in December 2023 and January 2024 were eye-opening for many of us across Maine. In just the 2 years spanning 2022 and 2024, Maine received 9 federal disaster declarations after a decade that averaged just 1 per year. So many of you here today have lived through one or more of these disasters and may still be navigating the recovery process. As communities participating in the Community Resilience Partnership, many of you have already taken action to prepare for extreme weather, storms, and floods. And as you know, perhaps better than most people, there is much more to learn to make Maine communities more resilient. And that's why Governor Mills established the Infrastructure Rebuilding and Resilience Commission in 2024 to learn from the storms that we experienced and to create a plan to help the state and our communities be better prepared for storms that are coming. And we want to share with you today the details of the Commission's work and also the final recommendations in the Infrastructure Resilience Plan that the Commission released. We also want to highlight some of the resources that are available to support communities in taking action to become more resilient. And so the agenda today will include Brian Ambrette, the director of the new State Resilience Office. Brian's going to start off with an overview of the Commission's process and details about the Infrastructure Resilience Plan. We'll also hear insights and perspectives from the plan and implementation from 2 of your peers who worked on the commission. And I just want to give a huge thank you to both of them for their service on their commission and for their ongoing partnership in this work. Linda Nelson is the Economic and Community Development Director for the town of Stonington and served as co-chair of the commission. And Shiloh Lafreniere is the town manager for the town of Jay. So thank you to both those speakers for being here today. Brian will talk about the resources at the State Resilience Office that are available to help the state and communities take action to become more resilient to storms and floods. Then Ashley Krulik, who's the program manager for the Community Resilience Partnership, will talk about opportunities in the currently open grant round for communities to incorporate the Commission's recommendations into local resilience projects. We'll have plenty of time for your questions, and importantly, we are very interested in hearing your ideas about where communities most need support in this work. So with that, thank you all again for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to Brian to get us started.
Great, thanks, Sarah, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm really excited to see such a great crowd. Representing really folks from towns, folks from our service provider community, and folks, as Sarah said, who are just interested in resilience and what the state and towns are doing and where we can go directionally as a group and as a partnership to do this. So as Sarah said, the Infrastructure Rebuilding and Resilience Commission was established in May of 2024. And it began its work with a series of community visits to hear directly from town managers, from county emergency management, from local first responders, and from businesses about the impacts of severe storms and floods, not just in December and January of 23 and 24, but really the 2-year period that has been so remarkable. And Shiloh from Jay can really speak to that. The storm that hit her was highly localized on an otherwise beautiful day in June of 2022, I believe. And so the commission really took its first step to hear from communities about the impacts of those storms and about how the recovery process was proceeding. So the commission visited Stonington, Old Orchard Beach, Saco, Rumford, Mexico, Jay, Rockland, Machias, and Caribou. And as a result of these listening sessions, the commission co-chairs and members developed some guiding principles or guiding values for the work that they would be doing over the ensuing year. And that's what this slide is showing you here. The commission really felt that it was important that whatever its report was, its report and final plan, was that it had to be pragmatic and it had to be actionable. It had to respond to the urgency that the moment had created, knowing that there are future storms ahead of us and we need to be much better prepared and taking really comprehensive action to get ready for these. The Commission really wanted to see a roadmap with prioritization, with timelines and responsibilities, so that folks could feel confident that it was not a plan that was going to sit on the shelf, that it was going to be something that could be carried out, acted upon, implemented with achievable results. The federal funding landscape shifted quite a bit as the Commission was doing its work, and so we wanted to make sure that the activities and the plans were maximizing available funding sources and coming up with new and innovative ways for funding this work going forward. As I said, the Commission really leaned into listening to communities and learning from their experience and where they were having success in implementing resilience activities, and to develop responsive actions to what we learned from communities. And so that the overall goal for improving readiness and preparedness for both communities and individuals. And then the Commission acknowledged that there was a lot of existing work going on at the state level, at the regional level, and within our communities that we wanted to leverage and build upon and really inspire the towns, communities, folks like you on the call today, and our next generation, that there is good work to be done and that we all have a role to do that work. As the Commission dug into topics like emergency communications, infrastructure vulnerabilities, recovery funding, permitting challenges, workforce limitations, and other topics, a number of key messages really surfaced, and they wanted to make sure we were communicating those key messages out in the final product and as part of the outreach that we're doing like this today. The situation is urgent. The storms of the past 3 years we can't assume that those are an anomaly, right? That this could be the future going forward. We need to be ready for it. The state must become much more active, capable, and self-resourced for hazard mitigation, disaster recovery, and climate resilience, both in anticipation of future disasters and storm events, as well as changes at the federal level in policy and funding for states and communities. The scale of the challenge is extensive, and that will require regional collaboration and capacity, along with work at the state level and the local level. And lastly, that the cost of inaction far outweighs the cost of being proactive and investing proactively. And so the Commission spent a lot of time learning about where the value is in resilience investments. And a number of reports for decades have shown that the value of proactive investments in resilience projects far outweigh the costs of disaster recovery, damages, and economic impact to these events. And so with that, I'm going to take a pause here and hand it over to Linda Nelson to share her thoughts and perspectives as a co-chair of the Commission, informed by her experience in the town of Stonington. So Linda, take it away.
Thank you, Brian. And thank everybody for being here today. Really appreciate people's engagement with this topic of resilience and how we get there as local municipalities. I think we should almost give a big hand and round of applause to Sarah, Brian, and Ashley and the whole team for building the Community Resilience Partnership to the extent it has been built, that there are so many of us communities that are participating and benefiting from this program. It's just a huge positive thing and kind of unprecedented from my experience in the state. So kudos to all of you guys for doing that work. You know, Stonington, some of you know this, but we were not completely unprepared when those storms hit. Probably like many of you, we had been doing resilience work very seriously, especially around sea level rise. If you've been to Stonington, you know that we are one of the state's largest working waterfronts. We are the state's #1 lobster port in terms of landings and value. We have 350 individually owned and operated fishing boats in our harbor, and we need the infrastructure for them to have access to sell product and to catch product, right? So we had done a sea level rise study in 2019. We had done a sea level rise mitigation report. We had included all of this in our comprehensive plan that was passed in 2018. The thing that happened with the storms in January was that we realized the environment was moving faster than we were. So it gave a new sense of urgency to our work. In other words, we realized that even though we had been working on these issues, we were behind, and seriously behind. And quite frankly, we're still behind, and I'm sure we're all behind. And the trends and the data that the Climate Commission has released about sea level rise is that it's accelerating, and some of these patterns are accelerating. I think the very tricky thing about this, and Brian mentioned this, is that this last winter may have lulled some people into a sense that, oh, maybe these were 100-year storms. You know, maybe this is a thing that doesn't happen that frequently, or this is just the nature of nature, and what can we do about it? You know, putting us back into our kind of fatalistic, natural resources place. Stonington as a fishing community, any kind of the natural resource extraction type of industries and economies can be somewhat fatalistic about these things in terms of taking action and being proactive. I think the most important thing for me as co-chair of the commission was to make this actionable, right? Was to understand the urgency, understand that we're behind, and then make something really actionable. I mean, everybody in this webinar today is some kind of active person in your community, and we're practical people, you know? Again, fishing community, we're going to solve problems. We don't want to do studies, to do reports, to do things that don't have any meaning, that don't have a point to them. And I know that a lot of people think that action is just based totally on money. And, money is a big piece of it. And it's certainly a big piece of implementation. And again, kudos to the Community Resilience Partnership for creating some resources, some financial resources to get some of this work done. But the other piece of it is just human action. It's about achieving consensus in your community with what the plan is, and then building the reserves and building the funding by which to address this. We know always that at some level, no matter what the federal government is doing, we have to rely on ourselves first and foremost. Maybe it's because we're an island community that we know that so clearly, but certainly I think Mainers really have that spirit in general. The size and scale of these projects, of infrastructure resilience projects, is way beyond what we can do locally. It's like beyond, some of the projects we're working on are twice the size of our annual municipal budget. So no, we can't fund those necessarily fully locally, but there's a lot that we can do. So that actionable piece of this report is, to me, what was so important and something I really emphasized as co-chair, that we had to come out with clear actions. One of the messages from the report that most resonates with me, and since we're all, again, from communities, I would ask you to pay attention to page 36 of the report, which gives the local actions, a very nice summary of local actions. And one of those is about creating a fund, starting to create your own reserve funds. Many of you probably have these. You might have them for your municipal buildings. You might have them for a certain project. We created a housing reserve fund in Stonington a couple of years ago, just as an example, because we knew we were going to have to take action in terms of housing. And as we were creating this report, as the commission was creating this report, we in Stonington created a Stonington Resiliency Fund. And again, just like any good municipal reserve fund, this is going to be absolutely necessary for us to move forward. Is it ever going to be big enough to fund the implementation of the kind of infrastructure resilience we need? No, it probably won't be. Can it provide matching funds? Yes, it can. Can it provide planning funds? Yes, it can. So I would say that to me is one of the messages that really resonated, because we have to take care of ourselves and we have to start planning for the future. And we can't plan if we're not going to put money aside for it, and if our taxpayers are not willing to fund some portion of the work. So we have to build that consensus. The first thing I did when the report was finally printed was to make sure I got a copy for each of our select board. And then I spent a piece of our public select board meeting with them and reviewing it. Now, this sounds like a completely obvious and simple step, but I almost forgot to do it. And my guess is a lot of communities forget to do it. Your public officials, not just your town manager like Shiloh, our town manager, Kathleen Billings, who has been on this resilience thing from the start. We're the paid employees. We're not just, but ultimately your elected officials really need to understand what this is about. And they're probably not going to just read it on their own. So, really having a session where you can go over the report with them and what's important about it from your view for your community, I think will be super helpful. So I'm really on the communications and planning piece of all this. That, I was in a select board meeting on Monday night. One of the taxpayers was complaining about the fact that we were spending some of our resiliency fund to do a plan, a Department of Transportation, village partnership initiative planning for, stormwater runoff and transportation and access. And, we were matching that with some funds. And they said, this is just, you're spending money on planning. And I turned around and I said, I can't build anything. I can't raise a road. I can't raise a wharf without a plan. Now, that should be obvious in terms of the engineering, right? And the engineering piece of it and that part. But the other part of planning is about consensus building and bringing your citizens along with you and bringing your select board and elected officials along with you. So I'm huge on the planning and the communications front. I almost have a T-shirt that says everybody has to hear things 7 times in 7 different ways before they get it. So the persistence and the repetition of these messages is really important. And as I said, Stonington does have a resilience fund now. There is money in the state that we don't typically have access to, that I think we do need to find creative ways to access. And that's our job, is to figure that out. And that's exactly why I'm so pleased that so many of you are participating in the Community Resilience Partnership. I think together we can really make an impact on how resilient the state is. So thank you for being here today, and thanks for doing all your work. Thanks, Brian.
Super. Thank you so much, Linda. And I saw that there's some questions starting to roll into the chat, so we'll have time to get to your questions towards the end of the webinar. So keep entering them in the chat there, and we'll keep an eye on that. So I'm going to dive in now to the nuts and bolts of the Infrastructure Resilience Plan that was the final product of the Commission's work. And I think you will see and hear quite a bit of what Linda was just talking about in the next couple of slides, and certainly in the details of the plan. And we will share a link to the plan in just a little bit so that you've got access to that PDF as well. So the plan itself is structured in 3 pillars. You can see those here on the screen: strengthening infrastructure and reducing risk, improving preparedness, response, and rebuilding, and sustaining the state's momentum with additional strategic investments. Within each of these pillars, there's a total of 11 strategies, and I'll go through those in the next couple of slides. And then under each of those strategies, there's over 50 implementation actions, and I'll show an example of how those implementation actions serve each of those strategies and the pillars. We won't go through all 50 of them word by word, but you'll be able to get access to them in the PDF document that we share. So in the first pillar, strengthening infrastructure and reducing disaster risk, the obvious thing here to focus on was identifying, prioritizing, and strengthening our vulnerable infrastructure. And the Commission really thought about many different types of infrastructure. Often we think about our roads, our water systems, and our electrical infrastructure. Those are quite vulnerable, as we've seen during some of the events, but there's also important community infrastructure, such as working waterfronts, mill sites, things that are driving the sense of community, the sense of place, and are the economic engines of places that the Commission also wanted to think about. Not surprisingly, second priority here is assisting communities to effectively assess and reduce risk. And so the Commission really thought long and hard about what are the resources that we need to bring to communities, where is additional capacity needed, and what are some of the barriers that we can help overcome so that this work becomes more prevalent and more advanced across all of Maine. And we'll get into that in a couple of slides from now. Improving and protecting energy infrastructure and energy resilience for customers. Most Mainers experience disasters through power outages. That's probably the most common way. And so the commission was really concerned and hearing from the utilities in the state about where there are issues and where there can be greater collaboration between the state and the utilities to strengthen our energy infrastructure and ensure that power outages are something that we are addressing as rapidly as possible. And then, of course, protecting and promoting resilience across that diverse mix of public and privately owned working waterfront infrastructure. This was a class of infrastructure that was particularly hard hit in the 2 back-to-back January storms. And so there was an emphasis on how we can support not only rebuilding, but the long-term resilience of that infrastructure. So I mentioned that there are 50 actions, and this is just an example. So if we took that second strategy of assisting communities, here's a snapshot of some of the activities that are listed under that strategy. And you'll see that we have the activity described, the time frame in which we expect it could be carried out, who would be the lead partners, the status of that as we speak or as the commission did its report, and then what existing resources there are that could be brought to bear on that activity. And so each one of the 50 activities in the plan is listed like this and has identified resources and accountability to it. And that was really important. If we go back to the first slide that I showed, the commission really wanted a plan that was actionable and identified who was going to do what when. And this is what we try to lay out here for each of the strategies. In the second bucket, the second pillar of the plan, we had 4 more strategy areas: enhancing communications during and immediately after emergencies, strengthening emergency coordination and rapid reaction, expediting permitting so that when folks need to rebuild something that they're not getting stuck in a backlog of permitting. And then developing tools and education to make our buildings more resilient. So thinking about how we use our building codes across the state to sort of drive resilience. In the third pillar, sustaining Maine's momentum through strategic investments, this is really looking at what the state and communities can do for the long haul. How do we make sure that we're investing in ways that give us these capabilities and the tools to do this work over the next 25 to 50 years, right? So improving the data and information sharing to help state and local leaders make informed decisions about risk. This ranges from improving our flood maps to thinking about other forms of other natural hazards that we want to supply, generate and supply information on. Maximizing the federal funding that we have access to for disaster recovery and proactive resilience projects. There is still federal funding out there. There are still federal programs. We want to make sure that we're taking advantage of those where we can. And then developing the state's own long-term funding and financing strategies for infrastructure resilience. And as Linda said, this is not just a state responsibility, it's a state and local responsibility. Thinking about how we build up those accounts so that you've got, as a community, you've got some ability to start doing some planning work or to think about match for a larger state or federal grant. And so this is really important both at the local level and at the state level. The commission spent quite a bit of time thinking about how would we prioritize much larger investments in infrastructure? Where are those investments needed? What kinds of considerations would go into where those investments are directed, and then even thinking about the insurance side. Are there insurance mechanisms that we can look into for some of our public infrastructure that may be self-insured or going uninsured and relying on federal disaster funds to repair? So that was the overall structure of the commission's final plan. As Linda mentioned, it did make note of some activities that communities could address in the near term. And one of those is completing a vulnerability assessment to identify risks and needs. And we have community resilience partnership grants for that. There's the service provider grant and the community action grant. And Ashley will talk about both of these in a couple of moments. There's creating or updating a local capital investment plan. Many of your communities have capital investment plans or have capital investment needs that could use a plan. And thinking about how you can incorporate resilience into those plans would be a really great next step after you understand what your risks and needs are. Linda talked about the resilience reserve account, so I'm not going to discuss that. I think she did a really great job. And then thinking about how to match those priority projects to funding and financing options that are available. And we have our Community Resilience Partnership regional coordinators, each of the 10 regional councils, who are on board to help you do just that, help you research some of the funding opportunities, think about where there might be financing opportunities. It's not going to get done just with grants. So we do need to think about other types of funding to bring into these projects. And so a regional coordinator can help you start to think through that and develop a project in line with the funding that's available. So I'm going to stop here again and invite Shiloh Lafreniere from the town of Jay to talk a bit about her experience in Jay and what she brought to the commission and what she's taking away from it. So Shiloh, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here this morning. Just a little bit of background on Jay for those that didn't see us in the news or hear about our story since then. In 2023, our community was hit with 3 storms that each reached the level of a presidential declaration. So as a town manager that had never been through a FEMA storm before, 2023 was a very challenging year and has continued to be. So we had one storm in May of 23, one in June, and then the December storm that was more coastal, but still our inland communities all faced that as well. But for our community, the June storm was by far the worst. The damage that we had in Jay for that storm was enough to meet the threshold for the FEMA declaration for the entire county and the entire state. So our 3 storms were now just shy of $4 million in damages from that. And the June storm was 3.8 million. So thankfully, our damage was to the public infrastructure, mainly our roads, culverts, ditches. Then we had some damage to the sewer lines and trails, but it was largely just the roads. There was 25 roads that were impacted. Some of them were impacted multiple times by the 3 storms. We had a couple that in May had been damaged. They were repaired to the point of fully repaired, but not repaved yet. And then the June storm hit and took them out again. So it was definitely a challenging time. Thankfully, we didn't face the loss of life or property damage that so many other communities in Maine and around the country have faced, which we are very grateful for. But that allowed us to manage the impacts on just one front, but that one front was still huge for us. So when we talk about with the commission and in the report, we talked about the cost of inaction and just bringing it down to the boots on the ground level for town officials. I can tell you that you never want to go through a FEMA reimbursement process if you can help it. Thank God it is there, but you don't want to have to use it. So our, it's called the CAT-Z project, which is your management reimbursement costs. And that for our June storm alone was nearly $80,000, which really is just myself and my public works director. So it's probably a low accounting of the management time that went into this, but just gives you an idea of the amount of time that we dedicated to these storms and the aftermath after them just in management time. So after those storms, when the commission was started, I was asked to be on the commission to bring a perspective for the inland communities versus kind of the coastal communities that Linda can speak so aptly about. And when I came to the commission, it was kind of with a focus on our smaller communities. I realized that Jay is larger than a lot of our small communities, but we could still consider ourselves a small community. So I was coming to the commission with that type of a focus and thinking about things that I felt were unique to us, the challenges that we face as smaller communities. When the commission started, that was a perspective I had, and that quickly changed because I found that it didn't matter where you're located in the state, whether it's inland or coastal, northern Maine or Kittery, or where you are as far as size of community, whether you're a very large one or a very small one, we have a lot of the same challenges. And there may be a difference in scale of what those challenges are, but none of us have extra bodies just waiting around for a disaster to strike so that we can pick up the pieces and run with it. So we all have capacity challenges. We all need to have more knowledge, more assistance navigating the programs and the requirements that we face when we start interacting with the different agencies and programs. Basically, we just all need help. So as Brian mentioned, the commission ultimately came out with 11 strategies that we've talked about a little bit. And as you look through the report, which I'd encourage you to do, you may find that some of them resonate more with you depending on what your role is, or depending on where you're at in your community and the timing of, if you're just after a storm, if you're further out, if you're looking at planning, there's different ways that these will resonate with you. So in J, from our perspective right now in our current environment, we're really more focused on the kind of the first two strategies that were talked about, that we really need to take a kind of deeper dive in for our community. And strategy 1, as Brian said, focuses on strengthening infrastructure, and strategy 2 focuses on assessing and reducing risk. So for me, these are the kind of the 2 building blocks that we need to look at. We need to be prepared for when disaster strikes. And when we were talking with the commission, we were really focused on extreme storms, but at several of the different locations we went to, there was discussion, and the commission recognized that, yes, we're talking about extreme storms, but there's other disasters that can and will hit our communities that we need to be prepared for. I think forest fires, extreme heat and cold, electrical supply interruptions, those type of things were also mentioned at different places we visited with the commission. And I think that there's a lot of overlap in how we prepare for disasters, whether it is an extreme storm or a forest fire or something like that. So, but the main thing is that we need to be prepared. So I guess my biggest advice going through what we faced is really just to have a plan. Even if it's not a formal written step-by-step plan, which would be great if you have time to do that. But just make some kind of plan, sit with the people in your organization, talk about the what if scenarios. What would you do if an extreme storm came that damaged 25 of your roads in a matter of hours, that completely cut off several sections of town, or left people stranded? Who would be in charge of what actions? What are your immediate steps? What are your steps days 2 through 7? What are your long-term steps? Who do you call? Who could and who needs to be a partner with you in a situation like that? And those are all things you don't want to have to figure out on the fly when your world is falling apart. And I can say that from experience. When you get the call that says, hey, we're here to help, what do you need us to do? And you have no idea what you need them to do. It's not a comforting feeling. So have those discussions now. Have them now while you're sitting here with sunny weather outside and enjoying life. And we're going to hear more about some of the resources that are available, but take advantage of those. Reach out to your partners, to the county EMA, to your local COGS, to your neighboring communities, and start those conversations on how we can work together and help each other. Because when the next crisis hits, you're going to need to know who those people are, who you can call on, and what they can do to help, and vice versa. What can you do for your surrounding communities or for the people in your organizations? And then once you've gone through all of that, once you have figured that kind of out, have a handle on your plan, then figure out how to position yourself so you'll never need it. This is one of those ideas of working yourself out of a job, but in this case, it's so much better to have the plan and then to be able to work back from it. So when you're working on the plan and you're identifying things that are causing you to make that plan, think about it on the flip side too. So like, is there a vulnerable culvert that if it gets overrun and washed out, it's going to be a challenge for your community? So you're planning around that. Do you have sections of town that are prone to flooding? Do you need added manpower capacity to address a disaster? Whatever it is that you're planning around, really just start thinking about now ways that you can mitigate that. So in the storm of 23, we had several streams that overflowed their banks and ended up taking out culverts and the associated roads. So we've identified several of those as being high priority for future resiliency. And during the last CRP grant round, we applied for funding to have engineering work done to redesign those and start that process. Again, this is one of those projects that the CRP grant is not going to be enough to replace the culverts, but it's at least enough to get that design work done. So our intent is to be ready for future funding. So whether it's DOT's municipal stream crossing program or future CRP funds, just any other opportunities that present themselves. And now we're continuing to work through the after effects of the 2023 storm. It's not quick or easy. My public works director and myself are going to spend all day Friday with MEMA, hopefully beginning the end of the wrapping up and trying to get these declarations and the projects all finalized. But in having to focus on the damage control from these storms, we've actually missed several funding opportunities that would have benefited our community and put us in a better position going forward. But because we were dealing with the effects of the storm, we didn't have the capacity to go after that additional funding. So that's one of those kind of the cost of inaction. And I know that there's probably a lot of questions about where the funding for projects is going to come from. You know, there's a lot of items listed in the report that is going to take significant funds, and where does that money come from? But I think we also need to think about it in the initial steps of the planning piece. Like Linda had said, we need to take the responsibility ourselves to be ready at the local level too. And we need to be ready for when those opportunities come up. So the CRP grant is a great example. You know, do you have projects in your community that are ready to go? Have you identified how they're going to benefit your community? If it's another grant or even the CRP grant, do you have match money required if match money available if it's required? And is your community anticipating raising funds if you're putting to the position of being able to access grants that local funds are required? Have you guys thought about that? I know it's a challenge for us. We're going through a revaluation in our community. It's really a hard time to say we need to start a reserve account to focus on resiliency, but that's going back to the conversations of we all need to be talking about this and making sure that our community is involved, that our select board are involved, that everybody's aware of this. And you know, one of the opportunities that Jay missed out on was the storms in December, and then in January when the legislature made funds available, we were so absorbed in our own storms that we couldn't take advantage of the opportunities for funding that were out there. So just the idea of being ready for when that opportunity presents itself. You know, if a local philanthropic organization came to your town and said, how could we help? Would you have an answer for them? So thinking about that type of thing. And as a commission member going into this, I was kind of thinking how others can help us at the local level. You know, it's kind of, you're always looking up to, well, is the state going to help? Are the feds going to help? You know, and as Linda had said, we've got to start thinking at the local level. We've got to start preparing ourselves. We need to know our community, know our infrastructure, know our vulnerabilities, and then know what we need to do when there is a disaster. How do we take the steps to recover? And then how do we look at being prepared to mitigate those if the opportunity arises? And there's resources that we need to plug into. The report talks about some of these, what Brian's mentioned, and there'll be more mention of ways we can plug into those resources. But just be thinking about what your role is and what the next step are, who the individuals are at the county or state level that you need to be engaged with, and start making those connections. And there's a whole component that, as a municipal leader, I know I don't often think about, but the businesses and the philanthropic community, and how do you engage them so that they can be involved in this too? So just going back to the original thought of the cost of inaction, I can't stress enough how much it is, how essential it is to do these things, and how you're going to wish you hadn't which wish you had done them when you get into this position and you realize, gee, somebody told me back a year ago that I should have a plan and I should be thinking about this. I should have talked to my community about it, because again, speaking from experience, if you're not prepared for that, it adds a level of challenge that I can't even begin to tell you. And there will be another disaster. We talked at the commission about how the memory of a storm is very short-lived, and that's true, I think, for our communities and even for ourselves. We make it through it and we say, yeah, we handled that, we're okay. But when you really stop and think about it, we've got to be focused on, you know, really being more resilient. And you all being here shows that you are focused on that. And hopefully this community resilience program and the grant program can be assistance to you in that. Thank you.
Thanks, Shiloh. Yeah, I was remembering back to the conversation when we were preparing for this webinar, and we were talking about bottling up some of that urgency from the storms and make sure we have it on hand for when we have these blue sky days and the opportunity to do some of that planning, because none of us want to become experts in FEMA disaster recovery funding, but the two of you certainly have, and and probably many more of you on this call. Okay, so we're going to shift gears again and talk a little bit more about the resources that are available now for communities to do all of the work that Shiloh has just been talking about. So I've got one more slide, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ashley Karula to talk about some of the Community Resilience Partnership grants. But there are two significant sources of funding to the state that are relatively new and that became available as the commission was doing its work. The first is a $69 million grant from NOAA for our Resilient Maine proposal. And the state was awarded this grant about this time last year and started work on it in October. It's a 5-year, $69 million grant that is funding quite a bit of work, a diversity of work across many state agencies and partners. So I'm just going to focus on a snapshot of that, or a piece of that work. About $30 million of the $69 million will be made available to communities in various grant programs. 10 million of that through the Community Resilience Partnership, and about 20 million through the Maine Infrastructure Adaptation Fund, which will be coming next year. We expect an installment of that program next year. So Ashley's going to talk about the community action grants. A good chunk of this funding, about $2.25 million per year, will go to communities through the Community Resilience Partnership community action grants. And then we've also expanded our regional coordinators pilot. We initially had a 2-year pilot program for the regional coordinators. We've expanded that now to all 10 of the regional councils across the state, and for 5 years, the duration of this NOAA grant. So now any enrolled community in the partnership can call up its regional council, whether that's SMPDC or GPCOG in Southern Maine, Northern Maine Development Commission, Sunrise County, Hancock County, all of the economic development and regional planning councils have these regional coordinators now. So you can call up and you can get some assistance in putting a project together and finding funding for that project, or just thinking through, like, how does my town go about getting more organized for this work? So that's all in place and available now. And then the next couple of resources I'm going to talk about are things that we have planned and that will be coming probably over the next 6 to 8 months or so. So the first of those is engineering technical assistance for communities to think about how to do nature-based solutions and infrastructure resilience. So these are things like, everybody thinks about living shorelines as kind of the first example of nature-based solutions, but it's not only that, right? It's other forms of maybe some plantings or some stormwater retention that looks like some more natural rather than engineered or concrete solutions to protecting infrastructure. So the Community Resilience Partnership will contract with an engineering firm and will provide support to probably about 20 communities for infrastructure projects and nature-based solutions. So we'll have more information on that in the coming months, so stay tuned. But we're really excited to be able to offer this work to help communities kind of get project concepts up and started, right? How do we get from, we have we have a need, we have a concept for how to protect a piece of infrastructure. We need some initial engineering help to get that ready to go out for a larger grant application to further develop the engineering or go after some construction funds. We're also, under this NOAA grant, looking to provide some additional inland and coastal flood planning resources. Some of you may be aware that the Maine Department of Transportation is developing a new coastal flood risk model that incorporates sea level rise and coastal storms, and tries to understand how the coastal environment will be affected by rising seas. And so we're going to develop a user's guide that goes along with that model, that very technical model, a user's guide that will be more accessible. We'll have ideas for how towns and regional planners can use that model to inform vulnerability assessments or to help make certain types of decisions. So that will be coming probably over the next year. We may invite some of you to focus groups to help us think about that tool. And we're looking to do the similar things on the inland side as well. Are there ways that we can improve the availability and the quality of flood maps for communities? And then what are some of the tools that can go along with those maps to help communities understand, how do we use this map? We've got this kind of decision we want to make. How do we interpret the map or use the map to make the decisions that we need to make as a community? And then there was a law that passed this spring, LD1, that many of you might be aware of, that provided funding to the State Resilience Office to increase the availability of data about natural hazards, whether it's flooding or high heat or other natural hazards. We want to put that, make that available to communities and to planners, regional planning organizations, and your service providers, so that you have more ready access to it and you can incorporate it into the work projects that you're doing. Again, whether those are vulnerability assessments, planning, or project design, we want to make that data available to you. We're hoping to do some work updating flood maps in places where they might be out of date or need additional information to help them be more usable and more influential in your decision making. And then really exciting, and building upon that regional coordinator pilot, we have funding to support certified floodplain managers at each of the 10 regional councils. Right now, there are only a handful of certified floodplain managers in the state. And for communities to do work related to your floodplain ordinances or local floodplain management responsibilities, these certified floodplain managers at the regional level can be that extra capacity to help communities understand what the requirements are for managing a floodplain, and then maybe taking some proactive steps to go above and beyond sort of the minimum standards there. So all of this is in the works. Stay tuned. We're hoping to have some of these pieces up and running, say in the next 6 months or so, and then some more of it will take a little bit longer to come online. But these are those long-term investments that the plan talked about, the ways that we're building capacity, making data more available, making more data more available. And so this is really exciting direction for the Community Resilience Partnership and the state to be moving in response to these storms. And I do want to say that this slide is just a snapshot of many of the things that are happening under these two funding opportunities, and sort of in a broader sense. The NOAA grant made funds available to Maine DOT. LD1 made funding available to the Maine Emergency Management Agency, the Bureau of Insurance, the Maine Coastal Program, Volunteer Maine. There are many, many other partners across the state who are doing good work with funding like this. And so you will be hearing about those as they become available over the next couple of months and years. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley to talk specifically about the next round of the community action grants and how communities might be thinking about some of the items discussed by the commission and in the plan in your next grant application. So go ahead, Ashley.
Great. Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Linda and Shiloh, for your support and kind words about the partnership and how you've been able to work with it in your communities. And also being aware that we have 10 minutes left and we definitely want to leave time for some of your questions. I will try to be brief and get through the next few slides. But just as a refresher for everyone who may not be familiar, The Community Resilience Partnership offers grants and technical assistance to support communities to reduce carbon emissions and increase resilience. And we're really excited to currently have our 6th round of grant opportunities open. Our community action grants offer funding directly to communities to complete climate action and help support resilience, energy efficiency, and clean energy projects. Communities must be enrolled in the partnership or submit enrollment materials simultaneously with their grant applications to be eligible. And if you'd like more information on how to enroll, if your community is not enrolled, please feel free to reach out to me after this meeting. For this round, we have $4.7 million available for grant projects, with the max funding award of $75,000 for individual communities or $175,000 for joint community applications. The partnership has developed a list of actions that align with the recommendations in Maine Won't Wait, which is the state's climate action plan, and the commission report, and are eligible for no match grant funding. This list has recently increased to 96 actions that are eligible for no match grants, and I'll touch more on these on the next slide. The application deadline for the 6th round of community action grants is August 29th. In addition to those, we also offer grants to service provider organizations to assist communities with climate action and energy and resilience planning. So if your community is not enrolled in the partnership, you could work with a service provider to get enrolled and submit your first grant application. In addition, we now have a 2nd service provider grant track that has recently been added that allows service provider organizations to work directly with communities to complete vulnerability assessments to help identify climate hazards and risks and prioritize actions to increase resilience. Communities, again, must be enrolled or in the process of enrolling to be eligible for a service provider vulnerability assessment grant. This deadline is right around the corner for our round 6 grants, with applications due August 1st, but we do anticipate having another round of grant opportunities in winter 2026. And you can find more information on these opportunities on the partnership website. And go to the next slide. And as I mentioned, the partnership has developed a list of community actions that align with Maine Won't Wait and the commission report for no match grant funding. We use this list in 2 ways. First, during enrollment, communities review this list to assess actions that have already been completed and then to prioritize future actions and guidance for no match grant applications. This list was initially developed in 2021 based on the original Maine Climate Action Plan and included 72 actions. But with the release of the 2024 Climate Plan and then the 2025 Commission Report, we've expanded this list to include those new recommendations, and now we have 96 actions that are all based on feedback from key stakeholders and agencies involved in the development of those reports. Please note that if you are familiar with the original list of actions, the letters and numbers corresponding to each action have changed, so you will need to reference a new list for those. Next slide. So due to the overall focus in the state's climate plan and commission report on community resilience, there are many, many actions within our list that support ways for communities to increase their resilience and better prepare for climate impacts. I've just included a few key actions on this slide, which include conducting a vulnerability assessment for critical community infrastructure, adopting a climate resilience plan to reduce risk and vulnerabilities, and these may be informed by the findings of the community vulnerability assessment, updating a local or county emergency management hazard mitigation plan to address changing and future conditions and identify specific strategies. As Linda and Shiloh both touched on, the planning component of this is so important to be prepared for if these impacts affect your communities in a big and sudden way. To have these plans in place, and the Community Resilience Partnership can offer the funding to help you develop those plans and get them in action. From a policy update perspective, we also have added actions around requiring the consideration of sea level rise projections and impacts in your planning and permitting coastal development, and also adopting model ordinances that protect the environment and reduce risk from flooding and other natural hazards. As I said, this is a really small snapshot of our many resilience building actions included in our list, and I definitely encourage you to look at our updated list on our website, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about the actions or how your community can get started. So I'm going to hand it back over to Sarah now.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. And thank you again to all of our speakers. This has been really excellent content and presentations this morning. So we're excited to spend the rest of the time with you today answering questions. There are a few in the chat that I'll open up with, and then if folks want to raise your hand or come off mute and speak up, we're excited to spend the rest of the time together in conversation with you. So just a couple of quick sort of logistical questions I see. There was a question about the slides and also about paper copies of the plan. We will send the slides out. And if you reach out to any of us, Ashley, Brian, or I, we can help make arrangements that you can get copies of the plan to provide to members of your community or your select board to help you, as Linda and Shiloh were recommending, sit down and kind of look through it. So please just reach out and we're happy to make that happen for you. We'll send out the slides. And I also just want to make sure folks saw Ashley put the link to the report in the chat. So just want to make sure that folks have access to that digital copy as well. And then we'll turn to some of the more content questions. Linda, the first question is around how Stonington funds its reserve account. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, Sarah, thank you. I'm assuming that municipal people on the call have reserve accounts for other line items. And we typically fund reserve accounts through the taxation process, right? Through the warrant process, through town meeting. The voters have to vote on what size they want the reserve fund to be, and then year after year, how much they want to dedicate to it. So that's a typical municipal reserve fund. And for the most part, I recommend following that model as much as possible, because it does that democratic model that we've adopted, right? Of saying, proposing an amount and having voters vote on the amount, discuss the amount, builds that consensus, I think, that is really needed, and the awareness that is needed for how things need to be funded in our communities. Additionally, and sometimes I get in trouble for saying this, but I have said it publicly before, I do think that many of us in our communities have seasonal homeowners that we are not able to extract the full value of their properties from due to our flat taxation system. So I do recommend that there's a way that we can solicit funds for some of these reserve funds directly as charitable gifts, whether you work with a nonprofit partner or you do some other kind of logistical arrangement. And I think that that's completely okay. And not even just okay, but is needed in some instances. So those are the ways that we're working on it right now. We're doing a combination of, personal asks to people that we know would be interested in supporting resilience, to keep Stonington, to keep it a year-round fishing community, to fund working waterfront improvements that would make us more resilient in the face of sea level rise. These are important things. Thanks for the question.
Great. Thank you, Linda. There's a question in the chat about how LD 1270 helps with this. So this is for folks who are not familiar with this piece of legislation. This is the legislation that Governor Mills just signed earlier this month to establish the Maine Department of Energy Resources. And this was, as Brian mentioned, the reliability of the grid, power outages. That was a big topic of conversation for the commission. And a way that a lot of people in Maine experience these kind of storm damages. So what this will do is we currently have a governor's energy office that is responsible for energy planning and policy coordination. This new law will create this new department, and the department, it will sort of build on the work of the energy office and create a cabinet level position. And the department will be able to advance strategies to reduce costs, improve reliability, and improve sort of the grid reliability across the state and energy systems. So a very exciting development, and I think will be really important to how we think about planning and preparing for these disasters going forward. So thank you for that question. There is a question here about the already awarded NOAA funds and whether or not they're at risk of federal clawback. Brian, do you want to talk about the federal funds?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sarah. And this is a question we get frequently. So the NOAA funds, this is the program that I talked about that was awarded last summer, and we began work on it last October. It's providing funding, as I said, through the Community Resilience Partnership, through the Maine Infrastructure Adaptation Fund, and through a number of other programs across the state and with our partners outside of state government. The state continues to be able to draw down funds from this grant program, as well as some of the other programs like existing FEMA BRIC programs. And so we're encouraged by that. We continue to have access. We continue to engage almost daily with our program officers at NOAA. And sort of just from the bigger picture, you know, these grants are legally obligated to the state. And the Maine Attorney General's office continues to work actively on behalf of state agencies to enforce contracts where that's necessary, and to ensure that Maine continues to receive the federal funding that Congress has approved. So that's where we are. We're operating, we're moving forward, we're doing all of the activities that we said that we were going to do under our end of the contract to hold up that bargain. And you all are hopefully benefiting from that in terms of being grant recipients and recipients of the technical assistance and the resources that we're putting out there.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. I see Alan put a note in the chat around specifically the storm funding that MEMA is hoping to capitalize. So this is a revolving loan fund. MEMA is currently collecting projects from communities so they can put together a list to qualify for funding from FEMA to establish this revolving loan fund. And Alan helpfully reminded us that the deadline is Friday, July 25th. So I appreciate you reminding us all of that, Alan. It's an important opportunity. I think in this environment where funds are very precious, the opportunity to establish a new revolving loan fund for resilience projects is a good one. And MEMA needs all of our help to pull together a list of projects to be eligible for that funding. So thanks for that reminder, Alan. Other questions, or I'm not seeing any more in the chat. Other questions for the panelists today? Okay. Lots of appreciation in the chat, so thank you. Linda and Shiloh, I want to offer both of you a chance to see if there's anything you want to add as we think about wrapping up this webinar today.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I want to note that in Stonington, we're doing a resiliency roundtable community conversation on August 11th, Monday, August 11th. It's having these community conversations about these tough issues is one of the ways we're really trying to engage with all of our community members. And I recommend them. And I know these are capacity issues without question. But the more we can engage with our communities on different levels around these issues, I think the stronger we're going to be. So I just wanted to let you all know about that step. And I also just wanted to bring in the term deferred maintenance, because this is a big municipal term, and we could probably spend, Shiloh, we could spend the whole session on this, right? And if you're a school person or have ever been on a school board, you know all about deferred maintenance. Kind of the situation we've been in with all of this is the same situation that a lot of organizations do. They defer maintenance, right? And so this plan asks us to be proactive and encourages us to be proactive and gives us the tools to be proactive. So let's get out of the deferred maintenance mindset and save some money and for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Shiloh, any thoughts that you'd like to close with today?
Just really thank everybody for being here today. I mean, it really shows that everybody has this as a focus, which we need to have statewide to really be thinking about this. And I'm sure, as Linda would say too, if there's anything we can do that would help you, if there's questions you have, or as you start going down this path and you think, oh, I wonder how they did it in Stonington, or I wonder what they did in Jay when they faced this issue, just give us a call. I mean, that's one of the best things about municipal government, is that everybody really is willing to help each other. And I think that we need to plug into that a lot more. And I know I can speak for Linda saying that we're definitely available if anybody has questions that they think of after or want to have a conversation about any of this.
Shiloh, thank you. And again, a huge thank you to both of you. We are so lucky to have leaders like you and partners like the two of you in this work. So thank you all. There was a question about somebody looking specifically for their town, who they can connect with. I want to highlight again the 10 regional coordinators that are available at each of the regional planning organizations. Those are folks that are available to help municipal officials and town members with these kinds of projects and planning. So Ashley, do you want to say anything else about folks who are wondering who their regional coordinator might be?
Yes, absolutely. And I saw that Catherine did respond to that, does serve that community. So thank you, Catherine. But we do have a list on our website, and I can drop that link into the chat of where you can find regional coordinator and contact information for your community.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. And again, thanks to Ashley and Brian for bringing forward all the resources today. And please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have questions about those, if you're looking for more information about those resources. The new State Resilience Office is an incredibly exciting development. And so really looking forward to really making those resources more robust in terms of how they can support the work that you all are doing at the community level. And thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. Brian, anything you want to say in closing?
No, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'll direct you to maine.gov/future, where you can read more about the Commission's work and the final plan. And if you don't already know where to get more information on the Community Resilience Partnership, it's there as well. And then stay tuned. The Maine Office of Community Affairs and the State Resilience Office will be standing up this fall. We'll have more information about how you can participate in the programming here as the fall goes on. So we look forward to engaging you through that as well. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Shiloh. Thank you, Linda. And thank you, Ashley.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.